Welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. I am Halli Casser-Jayne. This week, it is not the worst of times, but it is not the best of times. But these are scary times. And that's where we begin this week on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, when I and my partner in politics, former White House correspondent Matthew Cooper, slice and dice all things politics, and Donald Trump, too. And stick around for our second half hour, when I speak with philanthropist, co-founder of the Carlyle Group, chairman of the boards of trustees of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, the Smithsonian Institution, and the Council of Foreign Relations, and the author of The American Story, Conversations with Master Historians, David N. Rubenstein. Matt and I begin. Here we go. Well, good morning, Matthew.
Hey, good morning, Halli.
Matthew, I think I'm getting to be like a Jewish nutcase. I'm like so hysterical from this whole
Getting to be? What are you talking about?
I mean, I am like, if I cough, I'm like, I have it. If I sneeze, oh my God.
Well, that's what everybody's like
Is
now.
that what, isn't this scary? This is like, you know what I was thinking about? I was thinking about when I was a kid, when we had all that stuff with Russia and we had, to have air raid drills.
Right, sure.
Do you remember that a little bit?
Yeah.
A little bit. You're a little younger than I am. I just want to tell you what, this feels like that. And that was like, I went back and read, I still have my diaries from when I was a kid. And there's all this, I mean, I was terrified. This is beginning to get that vibe going. Everybody I talk to is insane. Like, what next? What next?
Yeah, I mean, it's right. It's a healthcare crisis. It's a health crisis and a financial crisis.
Right, exactly.
In one.
Who would, right? I'm like, just what? Just a few months ago.
It's everything you want.
Everything was fine. I don't get it. But you know where I want to start? I want to start with the first thing that I read this morning. Because this is really this just made me nuts. Do you hear me? Made me, and I'm nuts, as we both have now, discerned. Do you know what the Trump people did yesterday? They went to court. Are you aware?
Oh, on the Affordable Care Act.
No, on food stamps. While they were voting in Congress to increase, the availability of,
Right.
food stamps to us poor souls who, have problems because they're not working anymore. They were also in court. They've been trying to get it, you've seen it in some of the early states, the smaller states where they're going in and they're saying, well, you have to work now for 20 hours in order to qualify. Right. Now, most of the people, like in a state like West Virginia, aren't working not because they don't want to work. There are no jobs. Hello. The mines are closed. There's nothing left. And so they went in there with putting this qualification, which they have now determined in the few states they tested it, and it's a nightmare. It doesn't work. It makes things worse. That they were going to go after that anyway. So that's what they did. They went into court yesterday because the first judge turned it down and said, this is crazy. You can't do that. And that good old Sonny Perdue went back in. And it,
right, our Secretary of Agriculture.
Oh, just a real gem, this guy. And, they want to remove almost 1 million people and force them out, even as Congress is voting to give more people money, despite the pandemic. I find this so draconian. I just had to start there because there's something wrong with this administration. There's just something wrong with these people. Yeah.
Yeah, well, nothing's changed in terms of all those policies that were going on before the coronavirus crisis. I mean, they're still trying to overturn the Affordable Care Act. They're still trying to defend this cut in food stamp benefits. Their original budget, which had all these cuts, into the CDC and other places, is still the budget proposal of record. It's not going to happen, but it's still what they want. They haven't changed it. So, yeah, that's still the administration you're dealing with in the midst of this. And
excuse me, have learned nothing. Because the fact of the matter is, flush this economy with as much cash as you can get in there and spend. And it's going to be the poor people who are going to be doing most of the spending because the rich people don't need to spend. excuse me, it is insane. But we move on. I made my point.
You did.
Okay.
And I agree.
Okay. I'm so happy that we agree on this because this is really, this is nuts. But on this coronavirus thing, Florida is a weird state. We have two things going here that other states may not have as much of. We have the beaches, which are lovely.
Right.
We have I think one of the highest aging populations.
Yep.
And at certain times of the year, we have some of the youngest populations because the kids all come down here for spring break.
Right.
And that's where we are right now. Now, I've been kind of nice about this governor because I think Ron DeSantis, who was, an elected Republican, and that was a pretty testy election filled with all sorts of ugly, has basically been kind of down the middle as legislating and running the state. But
right.
Now money talks. And so they don't want to he doesn't want to close the beaches.
Right. So you've not had the bans on large gatherings that most states have.
And oddly enough, when it hits Florida, it's going to hit Florida harder. And if we've learned nothing else, which we're going to talk about in a minute from this whole thing, and that is waiting to see what happens or not acting, proactively gets you in a lot of trouble with this thing, right? And here we go.
I'm not a doctor, and I don't even play one on TV, but this seems like a recipe for disaster.
Okay. And I bring it up for multiple reasons, but one of the reasons is that, so a fellow Floridian had tweeted about this morning, said, we go to the beach to relax. You are not only bringing people to the beach who are maybe old and sitting on the beach or young and having a good time on the beach, but these people are coming in from out of state bringing more germs.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
Potentially internationally too.
Good point. And here we are. And it's this kind of crazy that I think has us where we are, Matt. People don't seem to be thinking as brilliantly or as clearly or as efficiently as they used to think in times of crisis.
No, people do not do a good job of assessing risk in their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, right? And it's very crazy. Okay. So those two things, that's where we are. And before we move on to more, I want to ask you what the feeling is in Washington. How are people reacting? How are you reacting? What's the circumstance like, and as compared to what it might be down here?
Well, it's kind of surreal. I live in the city, and the bars and restaurants are all closed. The public transportation is at skeletal levels. There's a lot less traffic out. You walk down the sidewalk and people are consciously keeping their distance as they pass. The grocery stores, are packed, but, except for paper towels and hand sanitizer, they're pretty well stocked. They just sell out every day. In other words, there's not there's not a supply crisis. It's just sort of a panic crisis, if that makes sense. So it's surreal, I think you try to stay zen about it. I think as long as the power's on, the broadband is on, the water's on, and you can get your food, I think people are kind of resigned to that part of it. I think they're, the deja vu with seeing, the stock market collapse and the financial part of this is in some ways weighing more heavily than the health part, even though they're all related,
Yeah, except I think that's kind of topsy-turvy. I watch the news and I keep watching how it goes back and forth between, the health aspects of it back to the economic aspect of it. And it seems to be weighting at this point, from my vantage point, more to the economics of it. And I think that's kind of crazy because you don't save people's lives. Who cares? Who's going to be here? But hey, What can I say?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's just, it's
like if you listen to
I think
Trump,
the problem is that nobody really knows how to, well, we kind of know what to do in the health thing. It's onerous, but, they kind of know how to slow an epidemic. Some governments have done better at it than others, right? Ours is doing pretty lousy. Singapore, South Korea
nipped it in the bud.
Did it pretty well.
Right, yeah.
But the problem with the financial thing is everything they keep throwing at it in the last week doesn't work. And
I think that's a statement. I think that's a statement.
Yeah.
Why ignore every time Trump opens his mouth, the stocks go down. They haven't figured that out in a week. It seems to me they ought to keep him off the stage and let the economics guys do the talking. And maybe because I think there's a visceral reaction to Trump, and he's of course ticked everybody off worldwide for his for who he is, and we'll talk about that in a minute too with China. What do you think about that? I think that he's not the person who should be out front.
Sure. No, in an ideal world, he would not be. But I don't think there's any convincing him to, leave this to others.
So how are they doing in terms
the
of
the Trump administration?
Yeah. What's your take? How do you feel that they are?
Well, I'd say, a D- or an F. I think the delay in taking this seriously at the beginning has had huge consequences.
Books will be written
for us in the world, and that's kind of unforgivable. The sort of we got this under control. There are only 5 cases. It's all going to be fine. Between that and the Fox News, crew. That was really bad. Now, at least they're ready to do some things on the financial side that'll, hopefully mitigate this a bit, start writing checks and, open the windows and
too
at the
little,
Fed
too
and
late.
whatnot. We'll find out, at least they're not, at least they're not balking about spending. So that's welcome. Now, remember in the financial crisis, the bailout failed on the first vote. People were like, what do you need? What's the big deal? And then then the collapse accelerated and all those, sort of Tea Party types changed their minds.
And the irony of it all. The sheer irony of the whole reason the Tea Party even came into existence goes back to 2008 when they were just so pissed off that they were rescuing the big guys. And that's where, now we're right back in a way where we started. I know that there's the push from the Dems to, rescue the little guy. But the more you listen and the more you read the fine print, the Republicans are right back where they always are. Is let's do the cruise industry, the electric item.
Totally. This is crazy that we're going to do a selective industry by industry.
It's insane, is what it is, and so
and the economy's changed so much in 12 years. There's so many, gig economy workers and people working on their own, and God knows. If you don't do, to help the cruise industry and not the restaurant industry it seems insane.
I would say so. I think the interesting part here also, though, is that when you see how this is all going to play out, everybody stood with all the Republicans, all the MAGAs stood with Trump. Oh, the economy is so great. Oh, the hell, we can put up with the rest of the crap because the economy is great. Now the economy has sunk. You're not going to tell me by November that everything is going to be, the ship's going to be righted. It won't be, number one. And the stock market is now exactly at where it was when he started, when he came into office. There is a crazy irony in all of this. No question about it.
Right? Yeah, well, I still don't see them abandoning him.
They can't say they're abandoning him. He has too much control over them.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're reduced to saying, but he got his Neil Gorsuch.
Well,
Okay.
Yeah, all right, but that's what I'm saying. I don't think that they have a choice here. I think, and I'd be curious. I mean, there were an awful lot of people voting, and we're going to talk about that too. Let's get to that because, Mike DeWine in Ohio, Republican governor, said, "Oh, we can't have a primary because, oh my God, everybody." 3 other states pulled it off effectively, by the way. On Tuesday. And, we know pre-vote may have been part of the cause for this, but people were out in droves. I mean, there were some of the highest numbers. But, then you got the crazies playing politics with the election 2020. But here's what I'm saying. These are primaries. And my point was, forgive me because I just going to get to it, is I think there were, in some of these open primary states, there might have been Republicans voting or Dems who had voted for Trump now showing up voting, and which is why the margins were just enormous in Florida. It was ridiculous for Biden. I mean, he won every goddamn county. Holy moly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, I think there's going to be, as we get closer to the conventions, there's going to be a lot of wondering how those work, if they even gather. And as we get closer to November, if the health crisis is where it is now, I think fears will grow about an effort to cancel the election.
Oh, somehow. I think that's already bubbling up. I don't think
that's already up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think he's going to try and stop the election. I do.
Oh, yeah. And look,
I think DeWine was his first,
this is a country that voted in 1864,
right.
There were bullets flying.
Right. So this is what I'm saying. But I think that Sherrod Brown, who tried to be nice about what was happening in Ohio with the vote in the beginning, did 180 degrees yesterday and really went after DeWine. And I have to say, he knows, because you don't unnerve Sherrod Brown. Democratic senator,
who beat DeWine to become a senator.
Exactly, and he doesn't. He's a straight up guy. There's no question about it, and he's off the wall about this. And I think that they all know what the handwriting is going to be on that. I'm sure that Trump is going to do everything in his little power. I read something this morning about the fact that his plan had been after Biden secured the nomination to really go after Biden full steam ahead before they could organize, with Bernie getting out, so that he could kill him before it all even began. Kind of what happened with Hillary, I guess. But he couldn't. He got chokehold because he can't go after and play that on a grand scale. Even though, of course, Ron Johnson, the little shit, still wants to go after Hunter. But they put him off for a little bit. It just doesn't, it's unseemly. Yeah.
Yeah. At a certain point, the reality on the ground is, they can go after Hunter, but it's the efficacy of doing that when there's a depression might be less.
Hey, Ron Johnson was saying, what did he say yesterday? Did you see that? This guy's not okay. I mean, he's not okay. With the
what's the big deal? Only 4% of the population might die.
Yeah. I mean, he's at the top of the heat of the Republican, of Trump's administration. I don't understand. Who are these?
Yeah, I mean,
this gets back to the food stamps. Who are these people, Matt?
We're gonna. It's rough.
Let me bring up another name.
It's rough. Now, can I ask you something about this? So you're
my coughing.
Yeah, you're just. Yeah, I hope next week is a live show.
God help me. Go ahead.
If we start going to repeats.
Yeah, Hallie's sunk. Will you come for the funeral, darling?
This week is a special rebroadcast of our 2012 interview.
Oh, God. Scary. What were you going to say?
Well, I mean, you're down Florida. There are, as you said, a large number of senior citizens. I'm just wondering what it's, what it's like among the, among those who are older.
Well,
like are you seeing,
I have
people, are they?
I have lovely neighbors. I have the best. I live in such a great little community, and I have to say, everybody's hysterical. They're older than I am, but everybody has a pre-existing condition, whether it's COPD or, just you get to be a certain age and these little, diabetes. My lovely neighbor across the street who's like a daddy to me. He takes good care of me. He came by the other day and he said his wife had a doctor's appointment and she was hell-bent on going on Monday, and the doctor actually said, don't come in. Another neighbor comes to the door and says, you don't have to open it. I just wanted to make sure you were okay.
Oh, that's nice.
So, people are watching out for each other. There's a young couple who live across the road, and I've seen them go and knock on doors and say, can we go to the store for you?
Oh, that's nice.
So it's a good neighbor, but the stores are the same. You can't get toilet paper. You can't get anything. And they're opening the stores from like 6 a.m. until 8 for seniors. But you walk into a store, it's a joke, Matt. You walk into a store, you're going to be exposed. Because nobody's been tested down here. Virtually. Nobody. Right. And everybody's a walking petri dish. And you walk into the store and they say, you can't keep 6 feet away in Aldi's. How do you keep 6? And somebody's got their hand on the cart before you and there are no wipes.
Right.
There's a certain, they can slow it down. They can't stop it.
Yeah, no, I went to the grocery store the other day, and maybe 4 days ago, or CVS or something, and some guy, there's only 3 people in the store, but, all 3 of us are online. This guy comes right behind me. Like he stands right behind me, like it's a packed line.
Like he doesn't get it.
I was like, excuse me.
Yeah, right. And that's the other
You think
thing.
Everyone's got the memo. Everyone doesn't have the memo. It was like, my God.
I know. It's also damn scary. It's crazy. But let's get off of that for a minute. Because I want to go back to the election. Because I want to go back to, Biden won. Biden has it. What about our buddy Bernie? What to do with Bernie?
Well, I think to Bernie's credit, he's not burning down the house,
Well, he's not getting the press. Either is Biden.
Yeah, he's not declaring war on Biden. He's not even talking on these primary nights. I think he's basically going to try to push his issues. And look, you got to say, universal health care looks a little better right now.
Well, it's not happening in Italy. It's not helping in Germany, and it's not helping in Italy.
I know, but there are a lot of people who are now unemployed who had health insurance,
right?
And maybe
I get that.
Could afford health insurance,
right?
And now, I think Bernie. The irony is he's fading just as his issues
become relevant,
look better. Yeah.
No, I get you.
But I think the great worry in the Democratic Party is whether, Bernie will, Bernie's people will, say, there's no difference. Yeah, there's no difference between Trump and Biden. I don't know how they could say that, but they're worried that they will, or they'll sit on their hands.
Well, he got a little testy with the press yesterday, Bernie.
Oh, yeah, he kind of lost it a little.
Yeah, and so he's stressed. There's no question about it. But
well, sure.
His dream is over. His dream is over. It's sad.
Also, you gotta worry. About these guys getting coronavirus.
Sick. Well, 2 now haven't. One of them in Florida. 2
members of Congress. You have 2 first ladies in NATO countries. The first lady in Spain and Canada have it. It's not like it exempts the elite.
No,
they're politicians. Yeah. They're pretty vulnerable.
No, they're out there all day long. Absolutely no question about it.
And viruses.
Well, everybody down here is laughing over the fact that Bilardia's got it, and he's a Republican, and he's a sweet guy. Supposedly, I've never met him.
Right.
But the Republican was the first one to get it. No, there's no question about it that universal health care is. Listen, I don't think anybody doesn't want universal health care. It's just nobody can figure out how to feasibly make it work.
Right. No, I totally agree. I agree.
Yeah. under the best of worlds.
But
of
I'm
course.
worried about these guys getting it.
Well, they've been stubborn. Nancy's been stubborn about not doing, communications, and she's the one who says, no, we have to be up here. But, one person's going to die from it, and that'll be the end. They'll shut everything down, and that'll be that. But they aren't likely to die. They're going to get good treatment, Matt, unlike the rest of us.
No, they'll get
poor
decent
slobs,
treatment.
right?
But, I mean, can you imagine if Biden got it?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And listen, anything is possible.
Well, of course, it's the nature of this, and hopefully he won't. I don't know, Halli. It's
a scary time. It's a very odd time. I want to talk about heroes and villains. Can I tell you somebody who I'm utterly blown away by?
Yeah,
Andrew Cuomo.
Right. Very good piece in the Times this week about how he's kind of like he's a son of a bitch. He's a prick. He's the right man for the times.
And he's calling the shots. Every idea that he puts out there, they say no on Capitol Hill, and then they say yes. He is so proactive and so, I don't know if this guy's sleeping. Of course, he just had a terrible breakup with his longtime girlfriend, so maybe he doesn't want to be alone anymore. Let me get it. But I gotta say, he is a hero. And, he made himself incredibly presidential.
Right. And de Blasio, very slow.
Not all there. Never was.
No.
But I'll tell you another hero. Another hero is Andrew Yang. His $1,000 to everybody seems to be the order of the day. Right?
Right. No. We're all Yangians now.
Yeah. So God bless. And the other person, the other thing I wanted to talk about, Pence, Tony Fauci, all of these characters who are standing behind Trumpy.
Yeah.
I think Fauci, we all know is an upright, upstanding, good guy. I think he got himself a little too embroiled with this crazy administration. They actually didn't put him out there yesterday, I thought, until last night. On his own, he was out. So I'm kind of a little like, okay, what's this about? But, excuse me, anybody, what's the thing? Everything Trump touches dies.
Right.
I still say they're just, even as they stand there and their heads bobble like those things in the cars, in the 1950s with the dice and the bobbly heads. That's what they all do when Trump gets out there and yaks away and yaks away.
Oh, sure. Yeah. They do the bobbling.
They do the bobbling. And, there are no heroes there. What's the story with Jared running a shadow program?
Well, since he brought peace to the Middle East and has done so many other great things, he's now ready to, fix our greatest public health crisis in our history. So I think Jared's just the man to have his own. I don't know. It's unbelievable.
Can I be mean? Can I be mean?
Yeah.
Why? He doesn't have any facial hair. He doesn't have any lines in his face. He doesn't have any. It's like he's like a fake human.
Yeah, no, King Joffrey is unbelievable. I mean,
it's scary to me. It's just utterly scary. And the daughter putting out with Mom of the Year, as she's being paid fortunes to be in the White House, isn't she? I don't think she deferred her pay. Was home building tents, except that it was a fake photo because the picture of the youngest was about 5 years ago, so it's an old picture. I mean, it's like it's not pretty, but
the inability of the sort of administration and industry to organize to make masks and ventilators is unbelievable.
They're going to try and do what they did in World War II to convert a lot of these factories, right? But I think it's depending upon who you talk to. As to whether this is a short-term thing or this truly is a couple of years with waves.
But, that was a conversion to B-29 bombers. All we have to do is make masks. Now, I'm no engineer, but that seems easier.
Well, that takes me to China. which is kind of like...
I mean, you saw the CDC put out, like,
what?
Recommendations about how to make your own masks at the hospital.
No, I didn't see that. What did that?
Yeah, like MacGyver your own things. Like go get some stuff at Hobby Lobby. And there are hospitals where like the accountants and the administrators and stuff are buying stuff at hobby stores and like MacGyvering their own masks.
Well, it's pathetic for these first responders. Absolutely pathetic that they're not being covered by this, because we're going to lose them and then we're really in big trouble. I mean, this is a joke. I mean, this is just a joke. I mean, the talk is that where Italy was like 2 weeks ago, and and it's about to hit the fan, and we are completely and utterly, and they have less hospital beds than we do. Or I'm sorry, we might have less hospital beds because we've closed a lot of our hospitals. I don't know, kiddo. I think we're in deep caca. I wanted to talk about two other things real quick. One is I think Steve Mnuchin has been surprisingly terrific. Do you?
Yeah. I mean, I think he's, he was at Lehman and he was at the, worked with Eddie, what's his name, who bought Sears, and then that melted down. I mean, he was in the white hot center of the financial crisis, so I think he gets the sense of alarm and understands doing more is better than doing less. So that's made him a force for good in this.
Yeah, and I just he tends to be on the obnoxious side, but he's been containing his obnoxiousness.
Right.
If there's such a thing. West Virginia, my old home state, I want to talk about that very briefly personally. They weren't getting tested. There was not a test kit in the state from what I understand. And then there were 4. And when it hits the fan there, it's going to be devastating everybody there. We talked about this last week briefly, but I just wanted to bring it up
lots
again.
of, weakened immune systems from the opioids and the respirator, lung issues from the mining.
Yeah. It's a bad thing that's going there. And my heart goes out to my, fellow West Virginians. I want to, before I close, I want to ask you if there's anything that you find absolutely that you must tell me that I haven't given you a chance to say. Is there anything there for you?
Oh, just sort of in the cosmic sense that, like, we're basically social creatures. Our evolutionary strength was our big brains, but also our ability to kind of work together. And, sort of asking people to stay apart socially, I think is taxing on us in ways we don't totally understand. But I think it's a hard thing for people to do. I think this is it's not only stressful that people are afraid of dying and getting sick, but the separation is, I think, is harder for all of us than we realize.
I think that's true. It's just, it's not the human condition, by nature. Yeah. We're pack animals. I want to say to all my Republican MAGA friends, let me know when you turn down the socialist programs you're about to be thrown at you. Do that. And Mr. Biden, there's your campaign ad of all campaign ads. How many turn down the money they're about to get? That's number one.
Right.
Thank God for socialism in its proper use. I also want to because this is personal to me. Poor Andrew Gillum.
Yeah, it's too bad.
Yeah, this is a very sad story, and I don't think we've even heard half of what this is about to be. But for those of you who don't know, Gillum, who'd run for the governorship and lost by very little, all things comparative, former mayor of Tallahassee, African-American, CNN now correspondent, or talking head, got caught in a very uncompromising position in a hotel, one of my favorites, by the way, the Mondrian in South Beach, with drugs and a male escort and all sorts of crazy crap. And a couple of days later came up with the fact that he says he's an alcoholic like his dad, and he didn't handle losing the election well. And he's now off into the sunset. But this was a man who had great promise. And,
yep.
It just breaks your heart. And there's just a little part of me, Matt, I wanted to say, because he was on the forefront of getting we've had a big fight down here about getting former felons to be able to vote in the election. And,
right.
It's just been toyed with and played with and beat the hell up by the Republicans here. I bring that up because there are friends of mine who say they think that he may have been set up. And that the story is not over. So I just thought I'd put that out there because he was making headway on getting those votes to be part of the thing, and those votes will make the difference upon who wins the state. But
yeah,
okay, guys, I hope you will all.
All right, stay safe.
Stay safe. We love you all.
Keep distance. Right.
If it's a rerun, I died. Next week.
All right, we're going to see you live next week.
Next week. Bye, Matt.
Okay, bye.
You are listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern at hallicasserjayne.com and is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Find us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, on all your favorite apps. You'll find the podcast on your Alexa device, too. Just say the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Oh, and come play with me on Twitter at the Halli CJ Show. Imagine an event that brings hundreds of members of Congress from both chambers and parties together for an evening to learn about and revel in American history. Not only is it true, it happened more than 38 times over the past 6 years. In 2013, David Rubenstein, philanthropist and co-founder of the Carlyle Group, approached the Librarian of Congress with an idea for an event series in which members of Congress could put politics aside and immerse themselves in the history of the nation. Thereafter began the Congressional Dialogue Series, a dinner event held several times a year during which historic artifacts are exhibited and Rubenstein interviews best-selling and award-winning authors and historians for a congressional audience. In Rubenstein's The American Story, Conversations with Master Historians, these compelling conversations with the biggest names in American history are presented for all to learn and enjoy. The book is truly a treasure. Let's talk with David Rubenstein. Hello, David.
Hi.
How are you today?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
Well, I'm talking to you, so I'm very happy. Thank you very much. I have to tell you a story. The day that I received the book, The American History, I was down in the dumps. Trump had just been acquitted in the trial, and I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this country is a mess. I'm in Florida this winter. I took your book out to my pool on a cool midwinter Florida morning, and I began to read. And you know what, David? Hope returned. So I want to thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thanks for reading my book.
I'm not finished with it. I'm savoring every word of every interview. Needless to say, I could learn a lot from you, right? This just is a treasure. And tell us about how this thing got started, because it's really a great idea. It should be going on all over. You should take it on the road. Talk to me.
Well, thank you. What happened was I've been concerned about the lack of history knowledge by people in the country, 3/4 of government. And so this is because we don't teach history and civics that much anymore. But who better to learn about history than members of Congress, because they're making our laws. So I thought it would be a good idea to educate them a little bit more about American history by once a month having a dinner that I would host with the Librarian of Congress in front of only members of Congress, where I would take Doris Kearns Goodwin, David McCullough, John Meacham, Walter Isaacson, or the equivalent, and interview them about their famous books about famous Americans. This has now gone on for 6 years, had about 50 of these interviews, and I decided to take about 16 of them and put them into a version of a book, and then have people be able to see, who were not at the interviews, actually what they said about these great figures in American history.
The conversations are really remarkable, I have to say. Great historians speak to the greats in American history. Did you choose the experts first, or the subjects and then the experts, or both? I mean, how did you decide who, what, when, where, why?
Like anything in this kind of world, you want to attract an audience, and so if I invited somebody who was a great book writer, but maybe nobody had ever heard of them, they might not show up. So I obviously wanted to have the best-known authors, and obviously a chance to talk about your book in front of members of Congress as a lure for those people who are the authors. but I also wanted them to talk about their most famous books and the ones that people knew the best. So Doris Kearns Goodwin has written a lot of terrific books, but her most famous one is A Team of Rivals about Abraham Lincoln. And so I thought that would be a good book in that case. In the case of David McCullough, he's written a lot of great books, but one that won the Pulitzer Prize was one on John Adams, which is still in its, I think, 80th printing or something. So I try to ask them to talk about maybe their best books, and I try to get the best authors that I could.
Did you have personal favorites in terms of the, not the authors so much as the subjects? I mean, who do you revere in all of this list of the wonderful people who are talked about in the book?
Well, in terms of the people that are the subjects of the interviews, there's no doubt that, to me, the greatest president in our country and the greatest leader we ever had is Abraham Lincoln. He held the country together in a way that I don't think anybody else would have been able to do so. George Washington would be a close second because he kind of created the country. In terms of the people that I interviewed, I do admire a person I've worked with very closely, John Roberts, who's the Chief Justice of the United States, and I'm the chairman of the Smithsonian, and I work with him in that context because he's the chancellor. And I interviewed him because I wanted members of Congress to understand better how the court works. And at the beginning, I asked him if he really wanted to be Chief Justice of the United States when he was little. He said no. He said he didn't even want to be a judge or a lawyer or anything like that. He wanted to be a historian. But when he went to Harvard, he came back from spring break, got in a cab, said to the cab driver, take me to Harvard. The cab driver said, are you a student at Harvard? Yes. What are you majoring in? I'm majoring in history. Cab driver said, well, when I was a student at Harvard, that's what I majored in also, which made John that maybe he should not go and major in history so much and maybe go to law school, which he did.
I love that story. And listen to me, he just sat at the impeachment hearings and he was this figure standing, sitting up there, on the top of the heap and so sort of quietly playing God, if you will. I'm just curious as to what he's really like. Give us an insight into what you see as.
John Roberts?
Yeah.
John Roberts is a low-key person. He's not a person who seeks publicity. He's a very interesting person when you have dinner with him or lunch with him, as I've done many times. But he's not a person that brags about himself. He had an extraordinary academic record at Harvard, summa cum laude undergraduate, magna cum laude at the law school, but never mentions that. He's well respected by his peers as one of the best Supreme Court advocates over the last 20 or 30 years before he went on the court, but he never mentions that. So he's a very low-key person. If you didn't know he was Chief Justice of the United States, you might not, realize that he was a prominent person because he's very low-key.
Does he have a sense of humor?
He does have a very good self-deprecating sense of humor, which you see from time to time, and but he's not somebody that's on the speaking circuit trying to, become a comedian. But he is. He does have a good sense of humor, and I find him to be a very good person. I regard him as a friend. I
want to move on now to your term master historian. I like that term. I love it, as a matter of fact. You mentioned some of the people who are their interviews are in the book. David McCullough, John Meacham, my good friend Doris Kearns Goodwin. I adore that woman. Robert Caro. How important are master historians to the present as opposed to historically? I mean, a guy like Meacham, Doris, I was just watching her 2 seconds ago on TV, right. On the airwaves, helping us. Give us, I think historians are underrated.
Well, historians are underrated and probably underpaid in many ways. Right now, for example, only 2% of male undergraduates in college are majoring in history, and only 1% of female undergraduates are majoring in history. And because history is thought to be a profession that doesn't lead to a job on Wall Street or a great job in a tech startup, so people aren't majoring in history. And I think those people that have chosen to make history their profession are doing a great service for our country. And when people write these wonderful books, people are reading them, and I just wish more and more people were reading them, and more people were learning more about history. But there's no doubt that you have to admire somebody like Doris Kearns Goodwin, who would spend 10 years of her life researching Abraham Lincoln. And I asked her, why would you research and do a book on Abraham Lincoln? There are already 20,000 books on Abraham Lincoln. Does the world need another one? But she came up with something that nobody else had ever come up with, the team of rivals concept, and how he had taken his rivals and made them his cabinet members, and nobody else had really written about that and his relationship with them, and it was quite unique and obviously led to the great movie Lincoln.
To say the least, the great movie and the great book. And I think the thing about it is what comes clear in your interviews, interviews are very human to me. That's why I do what I do, because I get it at the moment. I think people think if you read a book like A Team of Rivals, history boring. She is it's like reading fiction with her. She is all of them. I mean, there's not one of them that I haven't read. And we need to get that back to people so they understand that, the great joy that you can actually, they're mystery stories. It's extraordinary. And, that's why I'm glad that I have you on the show.
The great writers the people that win Nobel Prizes in literature are invariably people who write novels. And that's because nonfiction isn't considered to be in the same category as something that qualifies for the Nobel Prize literature, with the exception of Winston Churchill, who won it for his history. But that was rare. He was probably getting as much for his leadership as for his writing. It's unfortunate that we don't give Nobel Prizes in literature to the great writers of history and nonfiction works, but that's what we do. If you read Doris Kearns Goodwin, it's like reading a novel.
Exactly.
If you read David McCullough, it's like reading a novel. So you get the pleasure of brilliant words, but also you learn something. So I really enjoy those kind of books, and I try to read as many of them as I can.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I want to talk to you about your interview with Ron Chernow. Wow. That was just great. Tell us about, first, that conversation about Alexander Hamilton. Honestly, I didn't know the story about how the musical Hamilton came to be. Wow, talk.
Well, Ron Chernow is a Yale graduate who was writing articles, but then he started writing books, and they became very well known. And then he ultimately wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning biography of George Washington. But he also wrote this book on Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton was a founding father who wasn't as well known in recent years because he didn't live that long. He died in a duel at the age of 49, as we now know. But he also didn't have any books written about him very much because he wasn't, didn't live to be in his 80s as many of the founding fathers did. But Chernow was intrigued by him, and he came through this story and put this story together, how this illegitimate son of two people in the Virgin Islands came to the United States on his own, had no money, wound up being the top advisor to George Washington, first Secretary of Treasury, and a man who was really responsible for a lot of the capitalist system that we have. A lot of it was his idea. He had some flaws, as all people do, but the story is quite remarkable. And when Lin-Manuel Miranda saw this book, when he was reading it during a vacation he was having, I think in Mexico, he decided to make a play out of it. And when I was once getting an award in Wall Street, the people said, would I mind having, if the award was named after Alexander Hamilton, they said, would I mind having somebody who's writing a play about Alexander Hamilton come and sing some hip-hop songs about Alexander Hamilton? I said, well, I don't care, but it's fine. So he came, he sang the songs. I said, I'm glad I'm not investing in this play because it's not going anywhere. Obviously, I made a terrible mistake. The most successful play in history of Broadway. But, one of the great things about the Hamilton play is people go there and they learn about history in ways that they haven't before. So while I hope that people would read books, everybody isn't going to read a 600 or 700 page book. If you can go to the Hamilton play and learn a little bit about Hamilton, a little bit of Washington, the founding of our country, that's better than nothing at all.
The great gift of the arts, right? In so many different ways, you can get the message across, and it's extraordinary. Speaking of which, let's talk about you for a minute. You're a darn interesting figure of our time, sir. You really, really are. Co-founder and co-executive chairman of the Carlyle Group, one of the most successful investment firms, chairman of the board of trustees of John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, great American treasure, the Smithsonian, another one, on the Council of Foreign Relations, awards up the yin-yang. You have your show, PBS, and Bloomberg TV. Who are you? Where'd you come from? What an extraordinary man.
I'm very lucky. Well, I'm not sure everybody would agree with that, but I got very lucky in life. My parents were not educated in the sense they didn't have college or high school degrees. I was their only child. They put a lot of energy into me. And, I didn't have money when I was growing up. My father worked in the post office, but there's a great advantage of growing up without wealth if you have the unconditional love of your parents and you can feel that you have to make something of yourself. My own children have grown up in a wealthier setting, and it's more complicated growing up in that way, though people obviously don't agree with that. But the hardest thing in life, as you may know, is to raise children and raise healthy and happy children. And I always quote Jackie Kennedy, who said, if you mess up raising your children, nothing else in life really matters. And so I got lucky. My parents did a good job, And I tried many different things. I ultimately worked out in the business world, but I've now tried to give back to society, and I'm now in the process of giving away all my money. I was one of the original signers of the Giving Pledge, and that says you're going to give away half of your net worth, but I actually decided to give it all away, and hopefully if I live a normal lifespan, I will be able to do that. But for better or worse, I'm now 70 years old. And when I was younger, I thought 70 was ready for a nursing home. Now I think it's the teenage years, but there's no doubt that I've lived more than I'm going to live. So I'm doing what I call racing to the finish line, because I want to get so many things done before my time evaporates that I just don't really take a lot of time to relax. But I love what I'm doing. And when you love what you're doing, nothing is more pleasurable than keep doing it.
Can I put you on the spot for a second? I'm going to anyway, so don't even bother to answer the question. But I want to ask you about Mike Bloomberg, because I have you on the show. I have to.
Okay.
Tell me what you think about his running for president, putting his money into it, who he is as a human being. I know he's been a good friend to you. Talk to me about Mike.
Well, Mike is a person I'm close to because my TV show is on his network, so obviously I'm prejudiced because I think anybody puts me on TV deserves some praise, right? But Mike is a person who, like me, came from modest circumstances. Parents were probably better educated than mine, a little bit wealthier, but not fabulously wealthy. And he worked his way through Johns Hopkins and then Harvard Business School. And he got lucky, he would say, and built a company that became one of the largest in the world in its area. And he became fabulously wealthy. He's a very active philanthropist. He did serve 3 terms as mayor of New York. And now he's trying to do something that nobody's ever done, which is to, at the age of 78, he's now 78, I think his birthday was today or yesterday, at the age of 78, he's trying to use a fair amount of his money to try to make himself a factor in the Democratic Party nomination process, and that might be complicated because of his wealth, and he's relatively new to the process. But I think he is changing the dialogue a bit, and clearly he has a passion for taking on Trump, and that's probably what the Democrats need, is somebody who can take on Trump and do it quite vehemently. Now, I'm not saying that Trump should or shouldn't be president of the United States. I'm just saying that Democrats should have somebody who is really going to be able to take him on if it's going to be a fair fight. Today, my view is if the election were held today, Donald Trump probably would get reelected because the economy is in really good shape, and he gets some credit for it. And the key states that he has to win are probably ones that he will win. So I think today the Democrats have an uphill fight.
I tell you, I think there's something fascinating going on in politics, though, and that's probably one of the reasons that I thought I'd bring this up. And that is, Bloomberg was a Republican, he was a Democrat. Bernie Sanders is a socialist, not a Democrat, an independent. Right. I see an alignment, a realignment going on in these parties, and maybe that's just the best thing that could happen, even if it's putting us through some pretty fractious times to get to where we need to go. I'm curious as to what you think about that.
Well, the country's stability has probably been helped by having a 2-party system. Look at the other countries which have 3 and 4 parties, and they have very unstable governments in many ways. Look what's going on in Israel right now because of so many different parties that exist there. But in our country, we really have 4 parties. We have the kind of liberal part of the moderate part of the Democratic Party, and we have the more conservative traditional part, and the same is true of the Republican Party. And so these 2 parts of each party, they're always fighting with each other for control. When the elections come, we usually get down to 2 parties and don't really have third parties. Mike Bloomberg, who knows what's going to happen. The conventional wisdom in Washington today, for what it's worth, is that Trump probably will get reelected. But the conventional wisdom in Washington 4 years ago was that Trump wouldn't get elected. So you never know. When I worked in the White House for Jimmy Carter, I thought he'd get reelected, and look what happened.
Exactly.
But you just pick.
Yeah.
Almost certainly, if you were to pick who the president's going to be 6 months out, you'll be wrong.
I quite agree. It's fascinating to talk about. Let's get back to your book for a second, because you had Cokie Roberts on the stage,
okay.
Late Cokie Roberts, wonderful woman, talking about the American story and founding mothers. Her one great book, and then she wrote a whole lot of others. Just talk about interviewing one of the great interviewers, by the way, and about women in history.
Yeah, Cokie Roberts unfortunately passed away, breast cancer, a few months ago, and I was at one of her memorial events, and she was a good friend of mine, and very sad situation. What she did is something that people don't know. They know her about as a broadcast journalist or as maybe a radio commentator, but she wrote 3 extraordinary books about women in the early days of our country and also through the Civil War years and what they did to influence their husbands. Think about this. In the early days of our country, women not only couldn't vote, not only could they not hold office, they weren't even allowed to own property in their own names if they were married. So how did they influence their husbands? Well, they obviously spent time with them, but they had a lot of letters as their husbands were away. They wrote letters to them. The letters were extraordinary. We have 1,000 letters between John Adams and Abigail Adams, and you can see the depth of the intellect of Abigail Adams, even though she wasn't educated in the traditional sense. So Cokie Roberts did a great service for the country by saying, look, these women had a lot of influence. They couldn't hold offices, but they could influence their husbands. And one of the ways they did it was they would often organize parties, or levees as they often called them, and these parties were how people communicated because we didn't have other means of communicating. So if you wanted to know what the President of the United States thought, you had to go to a party with him, and organizing those parties were often things that first ladies used to do. And so they did provide a very good service, and they were fairly influential with their husbands.
I want to talk to you also about this. Scott Berg is one of my favorite interviews. He's delicious. His Pulitzer Prize winning book is Lindbergh. Certainly a complex man, to say the least. And I want to bring the complexity of character of a lot of these people who we so revere now. But there are also other characters that filter through history. Nixon, Andrew Johnson, Trump, with questionable character.
Right.
Your thoughts on the times that bring us such men? Do the times make great leaders? Do the times make our greatest rogues? Where are we on that? How do people like that rise to power?
Right. Well, there are two schools of thought on that traditionally, that the times bring out leadership qualities in certain people, and the other school of thought is that there are certain people who have such leadership qualities, they make the times different than they would have otherwise been. And without trying to resolve that in this conversation, I would say that some of the people you just mentioned and that are in the book are people that were so extraordinary that I think in any times they would have had influence. Abraham Lincoln was an extraordinary person, and I think the most impressive person who ever served as President of the United States. He kept the union of our country together. Without him, I doubt we'd have the United States today. On Scott Berg, he's a great raconteur as well as a great writer. He spent 10 years writing and researching the book on Lindbergh, had access to all the papers of the Lindbergh family. It was not authorized biography, but the family cooperated with it. And then after the book is out, he wins the Pulitzer Prize in 1999. He gets a letter from somebody saying, your book isn't complete. He meets the person. It turns out that Lindbergh had 7 children with 3 German women that his other family in the United States didn't know about and that nobody knew about. In fact, 2 of the German women were sisters with each other, and they didn't even know that they were each having an affair with Lindbergh. So he was an extraordinary American, but had a complicated personal life, you might say.
To say the least, and the Nazi connection, but we'll save that for another conversation. Listen, history offers a remarkable review of the past, but history has the rare capacity to view the present through its unique lens. You understand what I'm saying? If you were asked to write the history of these times now, I'll give you a sentence or two. Well, how do you think it's going to be written?
Of course, historians would say it takes 40 or 50 years after history has occurred before you can actually get a good perspective on it. But to answer your question, I would say that today the country is divided between people who think that we need to make real social and economic progress for all Americans, and others who think that the situation is pretty good right now, and we just sort of keep doing what we're doing. And I think the partisan divide in Washington is unfortunate. It's been worse at other times. At other times, we had people on the floor of the Congress hitting each other and beating them up. We're not having that now, but we do have verbal disputes that are quite considerable. So I would say this is not the worst of times, but it's not the best of times.
David, thank you so much for what you do.
My pleasure.
Nice to talk with you.
Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I've been speaking with David M. Rubenstein. His book is The American Story, Conversations with Master Historians. To purchase the book, visit Amazon.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of Resec, LLC. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, and is available at HalliCasserJayne.com and on all your favorite apps. Be sure to visit us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and follow me on Twitter at The Halli CJ Show. Until next time, this is Halli Casser-Jayne.